Hi, everybody. This is Adam Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. It's Tuesday, September 10th, and I'm taking a sample reading from one of my viewers today who volunteered their chart so that I could demonstrate some of the natal techniques that I practice so that you could take a look at a chart. For those of you who study charts and are working with charts or looking at your own chart, it's useful to see other people's charts being read from time to time because a lot of the times what we get on major popular streams of with major popular streams of astrology content are forecasts and transits, which is great. I pay attention to them. Obviously, you guys know I report on them all the time. But it's also, those transits are always out of context, right? Because we're never looking at them within our birth charts when we're doing, mass distribution of astrological forecasts for tons of people. So from time to time, especially when I'm advertising one of my upcoming programs, which I'm starting to do now, I like to demonstrate some real working natal theory and work so you guys can see what it's like and also get a take on what Hellenistic astrology is like. The techniques of Hellenistic astrology, ancient Greco-Roman astrology, sometimes called Greek astrology, very similar to Indian astrology. It is much more predictive in nature than a lot of modern astrology, which tends to be more psychological in orientation. So, of course, psychology and astrology have gone hand in hand since the dawn of astrology, but ancient astrologers were, I would just say, a little bit more accurate. Their way of using the language of astrology was a little bit more predictively accurate in my experience. And so studying ancient astrology, especially if you're coming to it from having known something about astrology already, studying it, studying modern psychological or evolutionary astrology or something like that, you're going back in time and you're learning some of the predictive roots of astrology, which are really, really helpful. If I had to put it simply, I would say ancient astrology is more of a karmic science. It's more about understanding the field of fate that you're born into. And of course, you have free will, but you're looking at karma, and karma doesn't change easily. And just like you didn't have a choice that you can recall about the family that you were born into, right? The socioeconomic status of that family, or your mom or your dad's karma, or whatever. So there's things that are more hardwired in our lives, and then there's things that are more open to interpretation, or we can navigate a little bit more with our free will. So ancient astrology, one of the things it's really good at is helping you understand where the hardwired karma is. So we're going to look at a chart today. We're going to take a look at a question from a viewer asking about what's coming for me with love and relationships, which is one of the most common questions that I get day in and day out. I'd say, 75% of sessions that I do with people, the question about relationships, either dynamics within an existing relationship or the question about meeting someone, will come up. And you can't answer this question without understanding the natal karma. So the first thing we're going to do in today's reading is we're going to try to understand what's the natal karma here around relationships, because that context is going to be important for whatever might be coming in the next year, let's say, or the next 2 years or 3 years. Once you understand the natal karma, you can make a prediction more accurately because you know what the kinds of constellations of karmic patterns are going to get activated when something starts happening in the relationship sphere of life. So then we will, after we understand the natal karma, then we'll look specifically at the forecast for this individual. We're going to keep it really simple. We're not going to do a ton of natal chart analysis, just trying to analyze the signature around relationship karma and then what's to come with relationships. All right, so in this chart, first of all, I thought it was really interesting. I always do a little bit of intake with my clients and always try to tell them a little bit about what you can expect from all areas of life, right? And so when I do a topical reading, it's a little different. Someone comes in for a topical reading, there's a specific question about specific area of life, and I might do a lot less talking about like the whole chart and just zoom in on whatever they're most interested in. But at the beginning, I usually do ask a few general questions regardless. And one of the things that I found so interesting in this chart is you can always tell, like, a place to start with a birth chart is to look at the dignity of planets, the planets that are in signs or places that they're really happy about, or that they tend to behave in their best, there's a light and dark spectrum for every planet. And you can tell through the language of ancient astrology when a planet is going to behave more like its best self or more like its more challenging its more challenging or shadow self, you could say. So another thing that you look at right away outside of planetary dignity is which planets are at the angles. The angles could be the midheaven or the IC, the ascendant or descendant, or the 10th, 7th, 4th, or 1st houses by whole sign house. So two of the things that stood out to me right away in this chart were, oh, look, here's Venus, goddess of love, and this person's asking about love, and it is in an angular place. It's retrograde. It's in the sign of its stability, which is a Mars-ruled sign of Aries. So that's a challenging place for Venus, goddess of love, to hang out in the home of the god of war, right? So that's a challenging place for Venus, plus she's retrograde, plus she's with the south node of the moon, all of which have big impact. And it's in an angular house. Angular houses like cardinal directions, north, south, east, west. Those cardinal directions in the chart, very powerful. So I noticed that right away. And for the relevance of this question, like that's something you have to pay attention to. The other thing I noticed right away is, look at this. The moon is exactly at the midheaven. So I didn't ask for any details about the relationship life because I like to try to predict that first. The more that I have knowledge from the client first, typically the crappier job I'm going to do because I start becoming biased or influenced by knowing too much about the person. I like to do some educated, predictive work first. Some of it's guesswork, some of it's, we'll hit the bullseye closer to others, but looking at the chart, kind of size it up and get a sense for it. So, but one thing I did ask at the beginning, as I said, just tell me what you do for a living. I find that in a question that's not related to career, that's not the thing that I have to investigate. Knowing just something about the person's professional life can help me. So it was really interesting that she said, I'm just I've just recently finished school for nursing, and I'm going to be a nurse. So I think that this is a career change, apparently, that's been made, but it fits. The moon at the midheaven is often a sign of someone who is known or seen visibly out in the world for doing lunar things. Lunar things can encompass a broad variety of fields, professions, interests, anything from being a mom to a caretaker to a nurturer to a healer to someone who works with land or property or nature or animals or the body. But it has a lunar feeling to it. So right away, one of the things that we say in astrology, in traditional astrology, is when the chart becomes radical, you're in the right place. What does that mean? That means that when you get even just one or two pieces of information about someone that immediately demonstrates that the chart, the chart's legit, the chart's speaking right away, like, oh, okay, this chart's going to talk to me. The thing that we take for granted is we think, if we think of astrology too scientifically, we're going to think, oh, I have to crack the code of this chart. Actually, what we're trying to do is get the intelligence, the divine intelligence that was the sky at this moment, which is an eternal moment, to speak to us. And that happens through a combination of a meditative immersion into the chart, along with good traditional delineation techniques. And then we also take into it just that meditative experience so that something can speak. I know where to look. I know how to start understanding the language here that the chart is offering me, the grammar and syntax, so to speak. But then there's this moment where it's not just me decoding a language, it's something coming through the language. Something is starting to speak. So right away, I've just finished school for nursing, and I'm going to become a nurse. I can see that not long ago, for example, Neptune transited over the moon in midheaven in her chart. Probably that was around the time when some inclination of a career change going back to school for nursing occurred. Hands down, that's when it happened. No doubt. It was not that long ago. So at any rate, now I'm like, okay, now the chart's speaking. But now it's my job to try to ask some relevant questions about relationships, right? So to make some relevant predictions about relationships, to start trying to narrow my predictive focus to figuring out what's the core karma here. So there's a number of different ways you can do that with relationships in traditional astrology. So first of all, you want to look at the whole sign house that is typically associated with the topic of marriage, which is the 7th house. Now, the 7th house was traditionally related to this Greek word called deusis, which has it's like the image of someone diving off from a diving board into water and disappearing beneath the surface. So you're disappearing just like planets in the seventh house are setting, diving below the horizon and disappearing. When you disappear into the water, it's as though you've been swallowed by the water, or it's as though you've become one with the water, or you've merged with the water. So that entrance into the other and disappearance or immersion into the other. The seventh house is actually the house of sex in traditional astrology. So that's I don't need to spell it out for you. You've got that, you've got the general image. So similarly, the consummation of marriage is associated with the seventh house, as is our marriage partners or anyone that we join ourselves with, immerse ourselves in, or disappear into. But the seventh house was actually also a place of great religious faith, and it was associated with worship of the gods. It was also associated with death and the later years of life, or the end of life. So it's actually a very diverse house. But one of the things we can always look at the seventh house for is relationships and marriage, just very basic. It's not the whole, the house is a lot deeper, but that's one of the topics. So we look and we see no planets in the seventh. You don't need to interpret Capricorn. Not as important as looking at the ruling planet of that place, which is everything in ancient astrology is really about the planets. And so in the seventh house, we see, hey, Saturn is the ruler here. So Saturn as the host or steward or ruler is kind of a heavy-handed term. Let's just say the host of marriage is going to be Saturn. And what do I see from Saturn? Well, Saturn's another challenging planet in the chart, right? Got Saturn in its debility in Leo, the sign of the sun. You see the sun and Saturn are polar opposites. Saturn rules Aquarius, the sun rules Leo, and the sun is light and Saturn represents darkness. Now, darkness can be a good or bad thing, right? Darkness can be about mystery. Darkness can be about understanding something that is on the outside, not on the inside. So the Saturn is a very flexible archetype, but generally speaking, one of the dichotomies ancient astrologers talk about is, with Saturn in the sun and with Saturn in the moon. Saturn rules the signs opposite the sun and the moon. They are archetypal dynamics of light versus dark. And that could be a yin-yang thing as well. You could even think of it like that. But when you put Saturn in the sign of Leo, or you put the sun in the sign of Aquarius, they are said to be in their exile. They're in a place that's foreign to their own nature. And so they take on challenges, and you have a more compromised Saturn. Now, this is a daytime chart in ancient astrology. When it's a daytime chart, you get better Saturn behavior in general. This is said by Ptolemy to be because during the light of the day, Saturn is warmed, whereas typically Saturn tends to be excessively cold and dry. So we want Saturn to be sort of warmed up. So when you get Saturn warmed by the light of day, it's a daytime chart when she was born. It doesn't matter where Saturn is at. Saturn's going to behave a little bit better. So that might mitigate things a little bit. We're trying to weigh and figure out, like, okay, so how difficult is this Saturn around relationships? But it's in Leo, which is its exile, and it's retrograde. Okay, so a little bit of a challenging Saturn. Immediately get the feeling of some difficult karma around relationships, love, marriage, etc. Now, that doesn't mean doomed. It doesn't mean awful. It doesn't mean there aren't learning experiences. We're just trying to get a read on the basic mundane facts of the situation. Okay, so Saturn in Leo retrograde could mean that there are reversals. That's what retrogrades mean. Reversals around love, marriage, and partnership. The karma could be more deeply entrenched and harder to change because it's a fixed sign. So you're working with a pattern here that's you're going to need a pretty big shakeup to get out of some of the deeper, heavier weight of this karma. It's a basic meaning of a fixed sign. It takes more time sometimes for it to develop or change. It's in a masculine sign that adds a little bit more dynamism to it. It's a little bit more reactive, which is good. You want that. That means that the fire kind of mitigates the heaviness of the fixed sign a little bit. Then what we see is, again, the retrograde potential for reversals. Okay, and then Saturn being debilitated, you're going to get a little bit heavier Saturn. One that general meaning, for example, when I see Saturn in Leo, is there might be some way in which your light is blocked, right? It's very, very simple stuff sometimes that you can use just to get a basic idea of what's going on, and then you can be more sophisticated later. So, okay, light might be blocked around money and love, right? Because we're in the second house of finances with the ruler of the marriage house. And then I see reversals and I go, maybe there's some reversals. Maybe this is heavier heavier karma to understand, and maybe light is blocked around money and love. So this was the first level of the inquiry that I made with the client. I said, have you had problems in the past? Because obviously she's single now and she's wondering about future love. Have you had troubles in the past with love and relationships, specifically around things like financial responsibilities, or getting strapped with something financially, or some kind of financial loss that's happened that's been, heavy, right? And sure enough, one of the first things that happened is, first she said, I'm not sure exactly what you mean. Could you be more specific? And so I said, okay. So one of the classic things that might happen in a situation like this is a partner divorces you and doesn't give you any money. They owe you alimony and they won't pay it. Or maybe in a relationship or marriage, it ended or tanked because you ended up having to be the breadwinner for everything, or you were strapped with financial burden. Or another one would be that you were totally reliant or dependent upon spouse's income, and then they left you, and then suddenly you had nothing. Okay. Given the fact so I gave her some of those examples, and I also added in the idea that maybe she was also a single parent who had become responsible for the child. Why? Because another house that can show us basically the same kind of pattern is the 8th house. The 8th house has a lot to do with karmic debts that we are owed by others, or that we owe to others. And sometimes those debts, when you see the ruler of the 5th house in either the 2nd or the 8th, there's a connection between children and money. Well, here we see the ruler of the 5th, children, Mars, ruler of Scorpio, 5th whole sign house, in the 8th house. And look, it's in a whole sign opposition to Saturn. So one of the other images that I tossed in there was, what about the potential for problems with, basically having a child and becoming a single parent, or spouse not providing so much after a tough breakup or something like that. So that's actually what it happened to be. I knew nothing about this client in advance. And indeed, she had a previous partner who they split up, and she has been a single mom for like a decade and has been the breadwinner. He's not participated in providing for the child very much at all. And so it's fallen to her. So that's the baseline natal karma in a sense. That's not all there is to love, but that's a major, just practical issue around the karma of love that she's facing in this lifetime that we have to square with before we can say much to her about, whatever's going to happen in the future with love. The issues in relationships in general in this chart may come back to the balance of responsibilities, especially around money, resources, and providing or taking care of things. The balance of power when it comes to finances and responsibilities in relationship can be a difficult challenge. There can also generally be the feeling of being left with the weight of something, so that your light gets blocked. Remember I said that your light gets blocked because you end up having to take care of something, or you end up out on your own, or you end up having to work so hard, or you end up with nothing, or whatever. So what do you want to be careful of? You want to be careful of two extreme figures that can enter your life in general. One is someone who really needs you, doesn't have much, and is not very responsible, but maybe there's something about them that's super attractive. Got to be careful of that one. The other one that you have to be careful of is going to be someone who provides for everything, but might be really controlling, and you could end up, giving away too much of your own responsibilities and power, and then eventually maybe being left or suffering from being controlled due to the person's basically their resources having a lot of power over you. So this is a very typical second house, 8th house kind of karma in general. Like a lot of the time, like a lot of people struggle with this, the differential of power and responsibilities around finances and relationships, and who wields the control and who wields the power. But this is one you got to be careful about, especially around you becoming the one who gets strapped with the responsibilities because of Saturn being debilitated, the 7th house ruler, the spouse, the marriage, the partner being debilitated in retrograde in your house of finances and money. So anything that we say about the future of finances and money have to run through that karma. So she's got to be careful about that in general. Now, the other thing you can look at, there's always a number of different things, right? But we know that the moon is at the midheaven in this chart in a water sign. We know that she's a Cancer rising, right? We know that the sun in Pisces is in a close trine to the ascendant, right? And so we also know that the potential for a relationship within which she constellates the pattern of caretaking and providing and nursing and mothering in both positive but also potentially negative ways is there. So that's something to just also be mindful of for this individual when it comes to relationship karma. Don't be the healer or fixer of someone who's broken, especially if they can't provide for you financially or participate in providing financially. That would be a big no-no. But on the other hand, the other thing that we should just talk about here is generally the need to be needed, right? Which is a secret thing about the moon in Cancer rising sometimes. The need to be needed. I get my sense of validation from, how much I'm needed by others. So that's another thing to just be a little bit mindful of in relationships here. Make sure that your partner is spiritual, academic, intellectual, likes traveling. You've got a big ninth house stellium. That's very, very important, right? So probably most astrologers would agree with that, I think. Now, the next thing we can really look at, though, typically in a relationship reading is planets in the seventh, the ruler of the seventh, as well as Venus, who is the goddess of love. And here we also have a challenging Venus, right? Venus and the south node of the moon in Aries. Venus is retrograde. That's Venus's exile in Aries. And then where's Mars? In the eighth house, karmic debts, things that were owed, things that we owe to other people, better or worse of it. That's just it. Now, when it's Mars, you're talking about the god of war disposing of or hosting Venus. So I just asked in general, has there been a karma in your life in relationships about the struggle for power struggles in relationships? And she confirmed that that's actually been a really, a very, prominent part of her experience in relationships has been power struggles. So that's just something to watch out for as well. The allure of power, as well as the potential dangers associated with being attracted to powerful people, or people being attracted to you because they think of you as powerful, or wanting to be powerful, or wanting to be liked for being powerful. Most of us don't think of ourselves as like, well, I don't have any complex about needing to be powerful. It's actually really, really simple human nature. We're not talking about, we're not talking about monsters. Most of the time, we're not. What we are talking about, for example, is sometimes we are, but a lot of the times what we're talking about is, when you watch kids play, like I watch my daughter play and I watch her play with other kids. Power struggles are as simple as who's sharing what, who's getting to talk and who's not getting to talk, who's getting seen and appreciated and who's not getting seen and appreciated. Basically, power struggles basically boil down to how much is my ego at the center of attention and how much is your ego at the center of attention. And there is a way in which competition is fun and healthy, but it has to have that playful element to it. This is a Venus with the south node and Mars disposing in the eighth that could have the feeling of vendettas or vindictiveness, or owing me something, or taking something from me, or no, you won't take something from me, or that level of, for example, sometimes you see Venus in this sign, it could be really good athletics. You know what I mean? So it doesn't always have to be like ultra negative or anything, but there's going to be competition and power struggle in a very basic underlying way in the relationships. Now, here's a quote with a south node of the moon. We add that in. What do we get? Well, south node of the moon in Indian astrology, which is the way that I approach the south node of the moon, has to do with moksha, liberation. So the south node of the moon is particularly, it's like K2. K2 is particularly interested in liberation. How do I get free from something? How do I get free from attachment, free from bondage? I want to go to the ethereal, to the spiritual, sometimes in a way that's rather escapist in nature, right? So when Venus is with K2, inner detriment in Mars' sign, sometimes there is a desire for moksha, liberation, escape through things that are competitive, sometimes things that are violent, sometimes things that are, just rooted in that Mars blood red Mars fight for survival. So this is also a karma that could speak, for example, to the desire to find independence through means of struggle, right? So this is a soul that could be conditioned from past lives, for example. I'm making this up, obviously, but conditioned in past lives from the fight for freedom or the fight for survival, the fight to extricate oneself from the possession of a man, right? But if that's ingrained in the soul and there's some way in which the soul sort of gets off on that, or there's a way in which the soul likes that or whatever, it's sort of like liking the bad boy and then liking the crazy space that you get into and liking the adrenaline of having to extricate yourself from the situation. That would be an extreme. I have no idea if our client goes that far with this at all. No idea. But that would be a pattern here that could fit. So let's just keep it really tame. And let's say at the very least, you need to be careful about power struggles in relationships. So the only thing, so I put that to her, and what she confirmed for me was indeed there has been a history of the power struggle and competition theme in relationships has been really prominent. So, and we know this is going to occupy a significant portion of her life. That this element of that, and it may be also like a way of redirecting that would also be like Venus South Node in Aries could find like hiking, backpacking, athletic events to be spiritually liberating. And maybe that's healthier than, really intense relationship dynamics where there's still this kind of potentially unhealthy desire to escape through this kind of conflict. Don't let anyone tell you that conflict isn't desirable. A lot of people desire conflict because it's like people who like to lift weights or who like to, punish their body with a hard workout. There is some way in which a breakthrough that's really intense, you break a sweat, you have to push and fight and struggle, but then you break through. It's a high, right? So we have to be careful of that dynamic in relationships as well for all of us. And because sometimes that's healthy and sometimes it's not. And, there's an inner little Jiminy Cricket that tells us the difference if we're listening. Anyway, so those are some of the relationship karmas in this chart. Now, what do we see coming up in, let's say, the next year to 2 years? And let's see exactly what it's telling us about relationships. Do we see any transits to this Venus or to this Saturn? Two major planets involved in the natal karma of relationships. And in fact, we do at the exact same time. Here's what they are. We see Uranus heading through Taurus and making a square to Saturn, while we also see Pluto eclipsing the specific degree of the descendant. Critical degree in the marriage house, Pluto, Lord of Death and Rebirth, squaring Venus retrograde. Okay, that's a big deal. The forecast for the next 2 years is a significant transformation of your karma around relationships. The transformation of karma around relationships can be healthy and positive, meeting someone new that helps you grow, heal, learn, work through some of the hitches we've been talking about. Or it can be a reliving of some of the same old traumas and patterns at a deeper level. This is where our free will comes in. This is why astrology is so important. Predictively, we know the karma. Predictively, we know where the karma is heading. We know that there's a season where these karmic flowers are about to spring up, but what do we do about it? Well, now we know to be careful around the money dynamics, and we know to be careful around the power struggle dynamics. Is it possible that they're going to be activated? Yeah, totally. Because what does Uranus in Taurus want? It wants liberation from financial constraint. Saturn in the second house. Uranus is going to want to break that free. It's in Venus's sign, by the way, in Taurus. Meanwhile, Pluto across the descendant. Death and rebirth in the area of relationships. Simple. Keep it super simple. But Pluto, the Dark Lord, obsession, right? Obsession, deep, dark, unconscious stuff that comes erupting. Sometimes you get the stalkers, you get intense, burning, cathartic, and sometimes crazy love affairs or romance, etc. There's that Pluto squaring Venus. So the potential to relive unhealthier kind of Venus retrograde and Aries dynamics around relationships, too intense, too passionate, a little dark and heavy. Be careful of that. A little passion is not a bad thing, right? But if it's activating some part of you that's going to go back into some kind of power struggle dynamic that you end up having to extricate yourself from later, Pluto is going to be a wrecking ball for that pattern, right? Pluto is going to bring in something that teaches you the lesson in a way that you won't forget. So be careful about that. That's the basic idea. So be careful about the desire to be liberated from finances, from the help of another person who comes in and is an exotic, dark, and potentially destructive Plutonian person. That's the main piece of advice that I would give. The second piece, though, is just know that you're at a moment where Uranus is also a karma buster when it hits Saturn, right? So breaking open some of the karma around resources, money, relationships, the desire to partner in equal degrees of responsibility and caregiving and caretaking, that can come through in a really nice way. And Pluto around Venus can also help you open up some of maybe the unhealthy Venus South Node issues in Aries, the desire for some kind of, Venus in Aries escape or liberation that might be just too intense, really. So those are some of the biggest transits coming, and they're both coming in the next year to 2 years. Give it, I would say, between now and 2021 is when you're going to see all of this constellate. So yeah, relationship stuff definitely on the radar for you coming up soon. To be more specific than that for a client asking a general question like this, to me, is not usually necessary. Moreover, it tends to provoke anxiety if we get too specific with long transiting outer planets. They peak, yes, at certain points, but the main thing is the next 2 years, watch as this wave comes through. It's going to intensify more so in 2021 and for Uranus. But 2020, you're definitely going to get the square from Pluto to Venus. So the next 2 years, probably even within 2020, you're going to see a new relationship probably coming through, or maybe someone from the past, but likely probably someone new. And then, so now I want to show you guys the second thing that I used in this client's question. I used what's called a horary chart. Now, I'm not going to explain the theory of horary in depth. I'm just going to give you a little crash course and show you how a totally different technique can actually corroborate your vision and understanding of a natal transit. So check out this one. So will I find love? This is just, a general question that I cast at the time I received the question today from one of my viewers. So in this question, we can give a number of different planets to our querent, the person asking the question, and we want to assign signifiers first. So what we're saying is, okay, our querent is going to be given the ruler of the ascendant, the moon, and Venus. These are the 3 planets that are going to represent her in a relationship question. Then I'm going to give the sun and Mercury to the potential other, the relationship. So ruler of the 7th house, that planet becomes indicative of relationships. What do we see here? We see Venus and Mercury moving together into a conjunction. Mercury represents the lover that's coming into her life, moving into a conjunction with Venus. What do we see here that we need to tell our client about? Well, first of all, Venus is badly debilitated in the exaltation and rulership of the other person. This means the other person, the person that's going to be entering your life, is going to have a lot of power over you. There's that power and the need to extricate oneself from the power of someone else. Venus is in the power of Mercury right now. Mercury is the person coming into their life. When are they coming in? Notice about 2 degrees of separation between the two of them right now. Given what I saw in the natal chart, the next year to 2 years. So that's the timing corroborating. Then, and it could be sooner than that too. But then the interesting thing is right after they get together, right after they get together, Venus is going to switch signs into Libra and Mercury is going to switch signs into Libra, at which point the power dynamic changes. Then Venus is in her own rulership, whereas Mercury is peregrine in Venus's sign where Venus has all the power. So we are talking specifically about a horary that has just reiterated the very basic thing that the natal chart said, which is that there is a partner coming into your life, yes, typical Pluto-Venus dynamic where there's going to be probably a power struggle with Venus retrograde in Aries in the South Node there in her natal chart. He's going to have the power in the beginning. She's going to have to take it back. it can happen, it will happen, at which point Mercury might be more willing to be, a guest in Venus's house. So I'm hopeful, actually, that some healthier version of a power dynamic could take place here for her. But I am a little suspicious at the fact that there is a power flip-flop taking place between Mercury and Venus, and can't help but wonder if this relationship won't be about a deeper lesson around power differentials and power dynamics in love. So the same warning, I think, is here in the horary chart. So that is our chart for the day. I hope that you guys enjoyed this demonstration. Now, why am I doing this demonstration? I'm doing this demonstration because on November 16th, my new course in Hellenistic astrology begins. If you thought this was cool, if you enjoyed it, then I invite you to come and study. Studying traditional astrology and learning some of these very organized, simple, and efficient ways of understanding karma in a natal chart. When you pair that, if you're a student of modern astrology, you already know a lot about psychological astrology, you know how to read personality profiles in the chart. Pair that with this more ancient method of, it's more of a karmic science. It's more these ancient methods of prediction. And I think you have a more well-rounded toolkit. So I'm really passionate about teaching people about this. If you've never studied astrology, but you're getting into it and you're interested, you're like, this is really cool, then I encourage you to take this program because it's meant for people who are brand new to traditional astrology, which can be a starting place for someone who's totally brand new. And it can be a starting point for people who have studied astrology for a while, but have never studied classical astrology, which again, I think offers so many amazing predictive tools that when you pair along with the desire to help people heal and grow, and you compare it with some understanding of the psychological dynamics of astrology, it's just such an amazing combination. I also teach a class in Horary. Won't be starting again until next year, later in the year. I also teach an advanced year 2 class in advanced forms of prediction. So there's a lot of things you can, if you want to study with me, there's a lot that you can do. The next class starts on November 16th on Saturdays. It meets 2 to 3 hours at a time. We meet 30 times throughout the course of a year, plus we have 12 guest speakers. There's an early bird rate that's in effect until November 1st. If you pay $12.99 up front, then you get the course for a significant discount. The normal tuition is $1,800 for 12 months. There's a certification option, or you can take it more for your leisure. So being certified, you take a test at the end, and taking it for your leisure, just doing it because you love astrology. It's more for your own personal use. You can take it that way too. All of the classes are by live webinars, but they're all recorded, so you can watch them later if you want. Let's see. Every lesson comes along with tons of bonus material, optional quizzes, forum discussions on Facebook that we have. You can email me year-round about questions you have as we're studying together. It gets to be a pretty tight group after a while. It's really nice. And also, I should mention, so you can check it out, by the way, if you go to nightlightastrology.com, go to the certification course tab. The other thing to mention is that there is a need-based tuition option, which is $67 to $100 per month. You can choose your own tuition within that range if you can't afford the normal class prices because you're a full-time student, a single parent, you're unemployed, you're on disability, you're retired and on a fixed income, you're a veteran, anything like that that qualifies you for some financial help. You can write to me about it if you need some help with that. I try to make this class really accessible for people because although I think that the price of the course is really great, I think you're getting a lot out of this awesome course that I've designed and been teaching for a long time now. I don't want to price people out. I want people to be able to just exchange, an exchange of karma based on your own budget. If you're in some hard place is fine with me. So feel free to email me at nightlightastrology@gmail.com. That's all I've got for today. Oh, the other thing I meant to say, if you like this and you want to get a reading, you can also go to my readings tab. I have 3 different kinds of readings: the expanded reading, the comprehensive, and the basic. They're 2 hours, 90 minutes, or 60 minutes. If it's your first time ever getting a reading, I recommend starting with the expanded or comprehensive. It gives us more time. If you're on a budget, we can get a lot done in a basic reading as well. People who have already had a reading with me, there's a few follow-up options which are slightly cheaper after you've had your first reading. So that's what I've got. You can visit the readings tab on my website if you want to schedule a reading. I'm always booked out about 2 to 3 months in advance. I think that means people like it, I hope. So, but just know that if you want to schedule, like right now I'm scheduling into December. So, you know, but I think that the wait is worth it if you want someone to really get in there with you and take a good look at, you know, what's going on in your birth chart and get a feeling of where things are going in the next couple of years. So I'll do some more birth chart demonstrations hopefully soon. Thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it, and we'll see you all next time. Okay, take care.